Orders of the day. I recognize the member from Barrie Innisfil.
Speaker, G218.
G218, resuming the debate adjourned earlier today on the motion for second reading of Bill 218, an act to enact the Supporting Ontario's Recovery Act 2020, respecting certain proceedings relating to the coronavirus COVID-19, to amend the Municipal Elections Act 1996 and to revoke a regulation.
Further debate? I recognize the member for Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. Speaker, before I begin, I'd like to seek unanimous consent to stand down our party's lead.
Member from Toronto Danforth is seeking unanimous consent to stand down the official opposition lead. Is it agreed? Agreed. Agreed. Member for Toronto Danforth.
Thank you, Speaker. I appreciate the courtesy. Speaker, this is quite an extraordinary act. I found it interesting that it has been moving as quickly as it is. I don't know if that's particularly critical, but what's amazing to me, and people should understand this act, people who have lost relatives, friends, mothers, grandmothers, aunts, grandfathers in long-term care homes, who have sued those homes for atrocious and negligent behaviour, are now in a situation where the government is bringing forward a bill that, when it comes into force, will dismiss all those legal actions against negligent players, dismissed without costs. So people who have for months been planning to take to court those operators who left grandmothers lying in their own feces in their beds, those operators where people suffered severe bed sores, those operators where cockroaches had the run of the place, any lawsuit against them is thrown out. And the families, and I can assure you, without having asked every one of them, I can assure you, mostly working and middle-class people in this province who don't have a lot of money to throw around are going to have to sit down with their lawyers and figure out if, under the very constrained terms of this new bill, they will actually be able to seek justice for their grandmothers, their grandfathers, their aunts, their uncles, who died and suffered under appalling conditions. I find it extraordinary that the government has brought this forward, that you can stand up in public and say that you've brought this forward, that you can go out and talk to people and say, yes, we think someone who died in their own filth should be forgotten, and those who are responsible should be given full legal protection and immunity. Pretty extraordinary. I think, Speaker, that the government could, if it wanted, exclude private long-term care chains from this legislation that shields them from accountability. And frankly, if they want to be able to go about in public without this cloud of shame over them, they should be doing that. This bill blocks the families who are looking for justice from for-profit long-term care corporations, and it protects the Ford government following the deaths of more than 1,900 seniors during the pandemic. Now, my guess is that the members on the other side of the House had the same experience as those of us on this side of the House when the pandemic was at its height, and that's that we were getting phone calls, we were getting people coming to see us, we were getting emails from families completely desperate for intervention and protection. Families who knew outright what was happening, suspected what was happening, read what was happening, and could not believe that they weren't getting intervention. I had one family in my riding with an aunt at a home just outside of Ottawa, and this is after the Army had offered to go in and help deal with problems. They knew that the place was dramatically understaffed, and what they couldn't believe and could not understand was why those operators weren't calling in the Army to help. Well, I think we know. I think everyone in this House knows, because we saw the report from Canada's armed forces on the conditions that were found, conditions that those operators never wanted to have come to light, conditions they wanted to bury with those who were subjected to them. And today, we're debating a bill to protect those who behaved in a way that was denounced by, I think, everyone in this legislature, certainly denounced by the Premier when he read the report, certainly denounced by the Prime Minister when he read the report. Any minister in this government who would be asked about that report would have denounced the conditions that those seniors were forced to live in. And yet today, we are debating whether or not those people should be protected. Those operators with cockroach-infested long-term care facilities should be protected. You've got to be kidding me. You've got to be kidding me. Speaker, we're in a situation where we had former Premier Mike Harris, who was chair of the board of Chartwell, or an army of former Ford government staff lobbying for private long-term care chains, and apparently very effectively. Very effectively. In a dark, dark way, I'm impressed by what they were able to get the government to do. They have gotten a bill brought forward, a retroactive
Eglinton
bill
Lawrence will come to order.
dismissing the legal actions brought by family members who have been pushed to the limit, and said it's being thrown out. Forget about it. Forget about the people who died. Yes, you were close to them. Too bad. It was so sad. But we're going to protect the operators. That's who we're standing up for. That's who we're standing up for. He can amend the bill. The Premier can amend the bill and end that shame. And I call on the government to do that. It's not too late. We're at second reading. This is going to have to go to committee. There will be third reading. The bill can be amended so that the memories of those who died in such terrible circumstances are not dishonored, so that their family members are not dishonored. That has to happen. Speaker, I think that it's incumbent on this government to be acting to make our seniors in long-term care safer. And when you give an operator a get-out-of-jail card saying, you're not going to be held accountable for what you did, then that means that the profound and fundamental problems that we've seen in long-term care will once again be allowed to run on without check. I've been in this place long enough, a number of you have been in this place long enough, that remember going after the Liberals, 2 different ministers of health, in situations where people were left in their own filth, and we heard vow after vow that it would all be cleared up, and it wasn't. And it was so uncleared up that we had almost 2,000 people die in this pandemic in the spring. And yet, Speaker, and yet operators are going to be protected. Not the seniors, not our family members, not our moms or dads, but the operators. Extraordinary, extraordinary. Speaker, this is a massive gift to those who have invested in these shoddy operations. Their investments will be protected. No getting around it. And the Premier, I think, needs to be here and speak to why on earth, after all the words that came out in the spring, he's doing this now. He's doing this now. Over the years, common law has evolved. The understanding of negligence has changed, and it's evolved with the hope that people will be protected, that there's a proper balance between those who've been harmed and those who may have or actually did harm them, and setting up protection for liability for those who acted reasonably is one matter. That's not what we have here. This is an act that ignores decades of judicial decisions, that will insulate bad actors, including the government and long-term care operators, from facing justice. I just want to emphasize that point. This bill doesn't just protect those operators who let cockroaches overrun long-term care rooms. This bill says that those who are protected include an individual, corporation, or other entity, and includes the Crown and right of Ontario. So if Ontario acted in a way that was totally negligent, I'll give you an example. Failed to regularly inspect homes so that the quality of care was high enough that we could feel comfort that our loved ones were being looked after. If the quality of care was terrible and not found because inspections were quashed, the government's protected itself. Isn't that extraordinary? Isn't that extraordinary? I'm sure there are lawyers right now somewhere who are thinking through the language that they just want to have on the back shelf in case someone finds a novel way of getting at the operators and the Government of Ontario for negligence, because right here, they know they've got incredible armor, incredible protection. That's staggering to me. Speaker, this standard of protection for the Government of Ontario and its acts of negligence and for long-term care operators is bad, but it's also retroactive. You know, if in April or May the Premier had stood up and said, it's terrible all these people dying, but you know, in a few months I'm going to make sure that everyone who's involved in running long-term care facilities is totally protected in law. And all you people out there who are weeping, because I had to deal with people who were weeping. We had a demonstration out front on the lawn early in the summer, distanced, masked, and there were people there who were weeping about the relatives they'd lost. If he had said, those of you who are weeping, rest assured, I won't stop until every operator is protected and shielded from your anger and shielded from the legal remedies that you want to use. What would we have been saying then? What would we have been saying then? Speaker, it's a reprehensible bill. I find it extraordinary that it's brought here. Extraordinary. I gather that there's at least one lawyer who's already talking about a constitutional challenge. I look forward to the Premier standing up and saying that he will use the notwithstanding clause to protect the Crown and the long-term care operators from people who have found that the bill fundamentally violates our understanding of what protection of life means. I look forward to him again saying, notwithstanding clause, yeah, that'll save some big operators a lot of money. I think I'll invoke it. I'm going to take you back to May. That's when the Canadian military put out their report on severe neglect in Ontario long-term care homes. They observed staffing shortages, patients being underfed, left in soiled diapers. They talked about staff with insufficient training, inadequate protocols to stop the spread of the virus. Employees were using personal protective equipment when they were going between residents. And in one home, residents with COVID-19 being allowed to wander through the facility. At the time, the Premier vowed to fix the province's broken long-term care system. Nothing fixes a broken system like making sure that the operators have legal immunity. Oh yeah, nothing says to an operator, you can operate with impunity because no one can sue you for a nickel. Don't you worry, we're looking after you. What else did the Premier have to say? He said the reports they provided us were heartbreaking. These are the reports from the Canadian military. They were horrific, a visibly emotional Ford told reporters on Tuesday. It's shocking that this can happen here in Canada. It's gut-wrenching. And reading those reports was the hardest thing I've done as Premier. And today, that same Premier puts forward a bill to protect the people who are responsible for these conditions. And, on passage of the bill, throws out the lawsuits from those families who sought justice. Crocodile tears does not really capture what we got from May from the Premier. It grossly understates what we got. Speaker, military report included observation of understaffing, poor sanitation, neglect of residents, employee burnout at 5 care homes, cockroach infestation, multiple reports of residents with untreated bed sores due to prolonged bed rest. In one facility, patients were observed crying for help with staff not responding. And yet, Speaker, the armour of immunity is going to come down and protect the operators responsible for that. So I look forward to hearing how the government says it will speak to those families in the weeks and months to come, especially those who've spent a lot of what I assume is not a great deal of money available to them, to launch these cases. The report noted serious hygiene problems, including patients being left in soiled diapers or on bare mattresses due to a lack of clean linen. At the Altamont Care community, many residents had been bed-bound for several weeks when military personnel arrived, and there was, quote, no evidence of residents being moved to wheelchair for parts of the day, repositioned in bed, or washed properly. Personnel at that facility also reported that residents were underfed due to staff shortages. And you're going to give them immunity? Really? Seriously? You're going to vote for that? You understand what you're voting for? You understand what happened? And you're still going to vote for it? The report also documents abusive behavior towards residents, including, quote, degrading or inappropriate comments directed at residents. There are reports of forceful feeding and hydration of residents causing audible choking. In one instance at Orchard Villa, residents were sometimes being fed while lying down, which seems to have contributed to one patient's death by choking. Premier said investigation of the care homes will include a coroner's investigation and results will be provided to police. Speaker, you can say the most moving words possible, but when you act to beat up on the families of those who've died, your words are proven to be worse than nothing, much worse than nothing. That is an extraordinary thing to me. Some of those families who are involved in this matter have spoken out, and I'll just give you a few quotes. Families from Orchard Villa. My family and others like us have been through a living hell in the past 6 months. We watched our loved ones suffer and die while our hands were tied, and the only people who could help didn't move fast enough. This tragedy will be etched in history as a time when those in power failed to protect our vulnerable citizens, and this new step shows the corruption of power at its absolute worst. Kathy Parks. This legislation will have the most obvious impact on lawsuits against long-term care and retirement homes who acted negligently and failed to take reasonable steps to protect their vulnerable residents. As a result of this legislation, it will no longer be enough for victims and the families of those who died to prove that the homes were negligent. They will now have to prove the homes were grossly negligent in order to hold them responsible for the damage they caused. That was not a family member, a lawyer, Melissa Miller at Howie Saxon Henry, lawyer for the Parks family. Marie Tripp, what Ford has put in this bill that has nothing to do with long-term care is stripping the rights of families being a voice for our loved ones who have passed in long-term care. This is not how I was raised by the generation before me. I was taught to stand up for what's right and fix the wrongs. Mr. Ford should not be allowed to get this pushed through to protect the pockets of investors in long-term care. His job is to protect the residents of long-term care with clarity and accountability. Darlene Thomas, I'm disgusted and appalled reading it, the Act. My grandmother died alone and under deplorable conditions at Orchard Villa. We were not allowed to touch or even go close to her casket or her funeral. What sort of goodbye or closure is that? Now the government wants to protect these companies? How is it fair for families of loved ones that died or continue to live in these facilities? Where is the justice? And lastly, lost my mother to COVID at one of the many for-profit long-term care facilities where military leadership felt compelled to expand their mandate to highlight the glaring errors being made. She passed mid-April. I was lied to many times during the crisis. I don't blame the people that lied. It's rather apparent they were following orders from corporate. The so-called inquiry is a sham, and so is the legislation. To the Minister of Long-Term Care, Mom was in the same home during the bad flu seasons. Any attempt to compare the two sickens my heart.
Thank you.
Speaker, I've made my argument.